1802. We are continuing with the book Lewis and Clark for Kids by Janice Herbert. And our story picks up 1802. President Jefferson asked Lewis to command an expedition to the West. Where we left the story before, President Jefferson was constantly thinking about what was out there, and how do I get it and keep it for our country and not the other foreign countries that are trying to get a piece of the action. So, 1802, President Jefferson offered a challenge to his young assistant. Would Lewis lead an expedition through the unknown lands of the West? Lewis was the perfect choice. He was a skilled outdoorsman, brave and clear-headed. He had great strength of character, intelligence, and curiosity. Jefferson was confident that Lewis, now 28 years old, had all the qualities required for such a great challenge and would prove to be an outstanding leader for the expedition. It was decided. Lewis would lead a corps of men up the length of the Missouri River, scaling any mountains along their path, which would end at the continent's edge. On the way, he would study and make notes of the climate, animal and plant life, and the presence of minerals. He would collect specimens of plants and animals for President Jefferson. He would meet with the Indian tribes who had lived along the route, study their customs and language, and speak with them about the new U.S. government in the East. He would map the vast area the expedition would cover, from the mouth of the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. There were so many things President Jefferson and Lewis did not know about what lay ahead for the expedition. One thing they did know was that the expedition would have to travel a very great distance to reach the Pacific Ocean. In 1792, Boston seafarer Captain Robert Gray had rounded the Americas in his ship, the Columbia, and traveled far up the western coast of North America. He had reached a great river, which he named after his ship, and had calculated the river's location. By using special instruments and calculating the position of the sun and the stars, Gray had pinpointed his position at the mouth of the Columbia River on the Pacific Ocean. With these measurements, President Jefferson and Lewis had a rough idea of the width of the North American continent, 3,000 miles. Jefferson thought that the expedition would be able to travel by boat up the Great Missouri River, make a short crossing overland to the Columbia River, and then travel down the Columbia to the ocean. I'm going to look at the map here. So, see up here, that is the Columbia River. So we have, this here is the Mississippi River. Goes up and down, north and south. And this is the Missouri River. And then the Columbia. Not sure what's going on here. We'll have to wait and see. Oh, I've got to find my page. It took Lewis a very long time to prepare for the journey. He had a lot of decisions to make. How many men should he take? The company should be large enough to accomplish its many tasks, but not so large that it would look like a war party to the Native Americans they would meet. What supplies should he bring? He needed to feed and clothe the group for an undetermined but definitely long period of time. What kind of boat would they need? Lewis ordered a special keel boat constructed for the journey. Packing for a long journey. What would you take if you were about to set off on a journey through an unknown land for an indefinite length of time? You might want to pack your Nintendo Switch, but you'd be better off bringing fish hooks. Lewis' list included warm clothes, lots of food, weapons, tools, and scientific instruments. He brought gifts for the Indians they would meet, tomahawks and tobacco, beads and bells, and vials of vermilion, red dye for face paint. He brought oiled cloth to serve as sails by day and tents at night, mosquito netting, candles, axes, medicines, hooks, kettles, and saws. He brought muskets and gunpowder. The gunpowder was stored in recyclable packaging. It was packed in lead containers that kept them dry. As each container became empty, it was melted down into bullets. Very nifty. There was a cannon for the boat and a special air gun that could fire without powder. Lewis had the food, dried portable soup, meat and flour, packed in barrels. And very important to this journey's mission, he brought lots and lots of ink and paper. 1803. Lewis invites Clark to join him in command of the expedition. Lewis's hands were full and his mind was bursting. There were so many tasks involved with getting ready for the expedition, to say nothing of the many things he would have to accomplish once it was underway. As he thought of the journey ahead, he came to the conclusion that it would require more than one commander. Lewis wanted a strong leader to help him command a corps of men through the vast West. This person would need to be a skilled woodsman who could help with the many challenges they would face in the wilderness. An equal partner who could take over all the tasks should something happen to Lewis. In June 1803, Lewis wrote a letter to the man he knew would fit the bill perfectly, his one-time commander, William Clark. In his letter, Lewis described the nature of the expedition and the path it would take, down the Ohio River from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to the Mississippi River, then up the Missouri River to its source. From there, Clark read, the expedition would travel by land to find the Columbia River, where it would once again take to the water, following the river all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It was the grandest, most exciting adventure Clark had ever heard of. He was thrilled when, at the end of the letter, Lewis asked him to join him in its dangers and its honors. There is no man on earth with whom I should feel equal pleasure in sharing them with as with you. That was an awesome quote and I messed up. Let me try it again. There is no man on earth with whom I should feel equal pleasure in sharing them as with yourself, said Lewis. Clark replied immediately, "This is an undertaking fraught with many difficulties," he said. "But, my friend, I do assure you that no man lives with whom I would prefer to undertake such a trip. I join you with hand and heart." One of the most famous partnerships in history was formed. Lewis and Clark would serve as captains of the expedition to the West. Lewis left Washington for Pittsburgh after receiving President Jefferson's instructions. Besides the main object of the expedition, to find a route to the Pacific Ocean, the explorers were instructed to measure latitude and longitude along the way, to draw maps of the country. They were to learn about the Indian tribes along the route, studying their languages, customs, and hunting practices. If any chiefs should wish to visit Washington, Lewis and Clark should arrange for them to come to the east. The captains were told to take careful notes of the climate and plan animal life of the country they passed through. Lewis spent long weeks in Pittsburgh waiting for his special boat to be finished. He grew more anxious every day to begin the journey. He hired several men who would help him take the boat down the Ohio River on the first leg of its journey. While he waited, he heard from Clark, who was waiting for him in the town of Clarksville, in Indiana Territory. Clark had been swamped with applications from young men who wanted to join them on their great adventure. He thought some were excellent young woodsmen. Lewis added a member to the expedition, too, a large black Newfoundland dog he named Seaman. After a long delay, the keelboat for the expedition was completed. Lewis had designed it, and it was named the Discovery. It was 55 feet long and 8 feet wide at its middle, tapering to 4 feet wide at the ends. It had a tall mast and center poles that held up an awning. 11 benches were made to seat 22 men at their oars. Its flat bottom would help it navigate shallow rivers. A cannon pointed out from the bow, the forward part of the boat, and a cabin at the stern, the rear of the boat. Lewis also purchased another smaller boat, which was called a perigue. Perigue is a French word for a flat-bottomed canoe made from a hollowed-out log. And because Lewis knew that at some point in the journey they would have to leave the river and the keelboat behind, he had another special item built, a collapsible boat. It was a special lightweight iron frame that men could easily carry over land. Then they got to water again. They could cover the frame with animal hides and turn it into a boat. Pretty nifty. On August 31st, 1803, Lewis and his men pointed the boats down the Ohio River. The trip down the river was miserable. The water was very low that summer, and every few miles the large keelboat got stuck on a sandbar. Sometimes Lewis and the men had to unload the boat to get it over the shallow places. Several times Lewis had to hire a local farmer with a team of oxen to tow the Discovery over sandbars. After several frustrating days, Lewis purchased another perigue to carry some of the keelboat's loads. As they traveled downriver, the water became deeper and the way easier. The country here was less settled, and they saw fewer villages along the banks. They camped every night along the river's edge, sleeping heavily after the day's long work. One night, Seaman helped catch dinner. He swam into the river and caught squirrels as they were swimming across, then trotted to Lewis's side and laid them down. The men had fried squirrel that night. One day, they looked up to see huge flocks of migrating passenger pigeons. There were so many birds that filled the sky. Another day, they stopped to investigate the site of a recent discovery, the fossil bones of a huge mammoth. Eventually, they arrived at Clarksville, where Clark was waiting for them. The two men were delighted to see each other again. Big Bones. The discovery of the huge petrified bones of a woolly mammoth excited Lewis's imagination. He sent a box of fossils back to President Jefferson. The site of the fossil discovery, called Big Bone Lick, was once a great marsh on the edge of the ice sheets that covered North America continent. 12,000